Hello, everyone. Welcome to No Longer Enslaved, where we have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. I am excited to be back with you. I have just returned from a glorious vacation, a much needed vacation with my family. It was wonderful to unplug. Some of my favorite places on earth are Tino Beach, Grand Bahama Island, especially the sunrises. If you've seen any of my social media posts, you will understand why I say that the sunrises are absolutely spectacular. And I have to say, my favorite time on the beach, or my favorite time of the day, is early morning, catching the first light of dawn on the beach. I go down there before my family wakes up. I've got my Bible, my journal, my hot cup of tea, my ice water, and I am set for hours. And I just love sitting back and watching Jesus paint the sky. So we had a wonderful time. And as I was there and just walking the beaches, I took so many walks in the early mornings with Jesus, just talking and praying. And he actually surprised me and gave me the green light on something I've been waiting 5 years for, and that is to talk about Israel. I've written about Israel in both of my books. He directed me to do that, but he had not yet released me to speak publicly about it on any sort of social platform. Even in conferences, he hasn't released me until last week. And so that's why I'm recording this episode. In fact, I probably will spend several episodes unpacking some of the complexities of the state of Israel. And so I am excited to be able to do that. And also, for those of you that want to dive deeper into this matter, these topics, some of the things that I talk about, I encourage you to turn to both of my books, The Roots of the Federal Reserve and Generation Hoodwinked. I go much deeper in those books. Roots of the Federal Reserve, I really laid kind of the groundwork, the foundational work at looking at the origins of Zionism. And then I build on that in Generation Hoodwinked. So if you want to go deeper, I encourage you to grab a hold of my books. I also am going to, in this episode, I'm going to share about my thoughts, my perspective on Israel, the state of Israel. I've had many people reach out and ask, and I haven't been able to answer them primarily because I hadn't gotten the green light from the Lord. I generally was just pointing them to my books. But now that I do have the green light, I am happy to share my views on Israel in this episode. I'll also touch on the origins of Zionism, Aliyah, and also the political nature of the agenda of Zionism. So that's what we are in store for in this episode. One of the verses I was praying right before jumping on to recording this episode is 1 Peter 4:11. And I want to read it because it really communicates my heart for these next several episodes. And it says, if anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. Well, it's so important to me that in sharing about Israel that I am representing the Father's heart. It really is about bringing honor to him. And so that's my desire heading into this. Now, as we have seen Israel once again become center stage in the world news, it makes sense that people are asking, what do you think about Israel? What's going on? And one of the things I want to draw our attention to is that the father of lies has spun a web of propaganda, a web of deception that has entangled so many of us unknowingly in propaganda. Now, Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propagandist, he was credited as saying, repeat a lie often enough and it becomes the truth. Well, one such lie is that the Palestinians have been living in the land of Israel since time immemorial, and that they were displaced when the Jews began migrating back to the land of Israel. Another lie is that the Jews living in the land of Israel now are in fact the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so therefore they are entitled to the land of Israel. See, these lies are meant to suck us into the magic circle. Now, I write about the magic circle in Generation Hoodwinked, and the way of escape is shrouded by these passionate beliefs of the veracity of these deceptive tales. See, the Hegelian dialectic bewitches us to pick sides. And it's the classic dilemma of the Greek thinking. Again, I write about this in Generation Hoodwinked. Greek thinking is, you want to draw an either or conclusion. There's only one right answer. And so you argue for what you believe to be the right answer. The Hebrew mindset recognizes that it can be both and. And so the difficult truth, is that both Israel and Hamas have committed atrocities. The truth is that both the United States and Iran have committed atrocities. Now, when war broke out between Hamas and Israel back in October of 2023, I asked the Lord, how do you want for me to pray into this? And he told me it's a contrived war orchestrated by both Israel and Hamas. Well, that was difficult to hear. But what it did is it helped me pray for the innocent people caught in the crossfire of a manufactured war. See, the Nephilim agenda is fueled by fear. And we know that bloodshed strengthens territorial strongholds. Well, war accomplishes both. And the Rothschilds, they have had their tentacles in the creation of the state of Israel for centuries. They fund both ends of war. See, the machinations of war actually generate these great profit margins for Nephilim hosts. Well, let me share with you, as promised, some of my views about Israel. And I consider myself to be a bit of an enigma, and you'll see why in just a moment. So I honor the Hebrew roots of our faith. I keep a Sabbath. I celebrate Passover, Shavuot, Feast of Trumpets, Feast of Tabernacles, and Hanukkah. See, I believe these feasts all point to Jesus, and they give us a depth of the gospel message that's been foretold for ages. My husband's family, his maternal grandfather was Ashkenazi Jew, which means my children have Ashkenazi Jewish blood in them. But I do not support the state of Israel carte blanche. And that's because the Nephilim agenda has been craftily woven into the nation state of Israel. I do, however, believe that Israel, the land of Israel, as well as the people of Israel, have a redemptive purpose in God's plan. I recognize that there's a remnant of God-fearing people living in the land of Israel, as spoken about in Romans 9:27. It says, Isaiah cries out concerning Israel, though the number of the Israelites be like the sand by the sea, only the remnant will be saved. See, I believe Gentile believers have been grafted into the olive tree, and our salvation should stir envy in the people of Israel, so that one day they will receive Jesus Christ as their long-awaited Messiah. Romans 11:11 through 12 says, Again I ask, did they stumble so far as to fall beyond recovery? Not at all. Rather, because of their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make Israel envious. But if their transgression means riches for the world and their loss means riches for the Gentiles, how much greater riches will their full inclusion bring? See, I believe every nation, including the United States, has redemptive purpose, even though a great number of our founding fathers were Freemasons. Similarly, even though a great number of Zionists, instrumental in the formation of the state of Israel, inserted wicked schemes in its foundation, this does not negate the redemptive purposes of God for Israel. Psalm 33:10 through 11 says, The Lord foils the plans of the nations. He thwarts the purposes of the peoples. But the plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart throughout all generations. So as we'll discover, the majority of Zionists instrumental in the formation of the state of Israel were not God-fearing people. In fact, they displayed outwardly fruits of wickedness. And likewise, the modern day Israelis are not all worshipers of Yahweh. Yet I believe there is coming a day when the people of Israel will turn their hearts towards Jesus because God's call upon Israel is irrevocable. Romans 11:25 through 29. It says, I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of Gentiles has come in, and in this way all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. As far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies for your sake. But as far as election is concerned, they are loved on the account of patriarchs. For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. See, Jesus is the threshold covenant. He's the mediator of the new covenant. He did not abolish the old covenant, rather he fulfilled it. And we see that in Matthew 5:17. Now, I do not adhere to replacement theology. Yahweh loves the children of Israel, and they have not been replaced under the new covenant. Rather, the new covenant enlarges the tent peg so that every tribe and tongue and race is incorporated. Everyone is invited to the banquet table as children of Abraham through faith in Jesus Christ. See, the Most High, he loves the land of Israel, but that does not mean that the state of Israel gets a pass on upholding the principles of the kingdom of God. Now, in thinking about some of the origins of Zionism, the term Zionism was coined by Nathan Birnbaum in 1890, and he was one of the first Zionist intellectuals, and he was from Austria. Well, generally speaking, Zionism refers to a national movement marked by Aliyah. Aliyah is the return of the Jewish people to their homeland, to the land of Israel. Now, a foundational pillar of Zionism was the restoration of the Jewish state. And the basic problem that Zionism was trying to solve was the misery of the Jews who were living in other nations and experiencing tremendous persecution. Well, one of the instrumental people in this movement was Theodor Herzl. He was known as the father of Zionism, and he wrote a book called The Jewish State. In it, he writes, "It is useless, therefore, for us to be loyal patriots, if we could only be left in peace. But I think we shall not be left in peace. Oppression and persecution cannot exterminate us. No nation on earth has survived such struggles and sufferings as we have gone through. The infiltration of immigrating Jews attracted to a land by apparent security and the ascent in the social scale of native Jews combined powerfully to bring about a revolution. Nothing is plainer than this rational conclusion. I shall now put the question in the briefest possible form. Are we to get out now? And where to? Or may we yet remain, and how long?" See, Herzl proposed that the creation of a state for the Jewish people would allow those Jews who wished to assimilate in their host nations to do so in peace, because the greater portion of the Jews would leave. And so with this mass departure, what Herzl believed is that the persecution against the Jews would end, because any remaining Jews would be so fully assimilated into their host nations that the citizenry would have no use of slogans such as, don't buy from the Jews or out with the Jews. Well, history proves that his convictions were actually short-sighted. He underestimated the intensity of Jewish persecution and who actually benefits from it. Now, long before the term Zionism was coined, the Jews longed to return to their homeland. And Joan Peters wrote a book called From Time Immemorial. And in it, she presents this thorough examination of Jewish migration into Israel beginning in the 1800s. Well, one of the things that she draws our attention to is that after World War I, nearly half of the Jews living in Jerusalem were Sephardic Jews of non-European Middle Eastern descent. Then she also draws our attention. She says, but what may be called a spiritual Zionism took root in biblical times in the Sephardic Jewish community. Those Jews who are uniquely indigenous to the terrain that is now the Arab world have retained in their liturgy the steady longing for return to the land of Israel, a longing that has been mistakenly assumed to be exclusively European. So it's really important to note that there have been communities of Jewish people living continually in Israel since the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So she goes on to say, it's only politically that the Jews lost their land. They never abandoned it physically, nor did they renounce their claim to the nation, the only continuous claim that exists. So in other words, there have been Sephardic Jews since the time of the Babylonian exile in 586 BC that have wanted to return to the land of Israel. See, Jerusalem held this sacred place in the hearts of the diaspora Jews, who were living in places like Yemen, Carthage, Libya, Ethiopia, and other parts of North Africa. Well, they would make the treacherous pilgrimage back to Jerusalem 3 times a year to celebrate the feasts. And today, tombstones in Yemen reveal that there were Jewish settlements in Yemen that existed more than 2,000 years ago. Now, Peters goes on to write, she says, more than 2,000 Yemenite Jews were setting out on the perilous journey to their homeland, where they would arrive in 1881. There, the first enduring Jewish agricultural settlement in modern-day Palestine, Petach Tikva, was founded on the deserted and ruined Sharon Plain by old-time Palestinian Jewish families who left the overcrowded Jewish quarter of the old city of Jerusalem in 1878. It was 4 years later that what is called the first Aliyah, a great wave of Jewish European refugees, would settle the land. Theodor Herzl came and with his own concept of modern Zionism, but not until many years afterward. So the Sephardic Jews, their roots of Zionism started as a spiritual longing to return to the promised land. But what happened in the late 19th century is that Ashkenazi Zionism gained momentum. Now, I'll speak more about the Ashkenazi Jews and their impact on more recent history in probably the next episode. But we have the American and European Zionist movements began with William E. Blackstone and Nathan Birnbaum. And it turns out that the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in 1881 triggered the Russian pogroms, and that awakened the evangelical church in America as to the plight of the Jews. Well, Blackstone, he was an influential evangelist, and he preached premillennialism, which was the belief that God will restore Israel as a nation before the return of Jesus Christ. So Blackstone's message actually reached millions of Americans, causing the multitudes to believe that the Jews needed a homeland. And Blackstone penned a document that he submitted to President Harrison and Secretary of State James Blaine. And it became known as the Blackstone Memorial. And I'll read portions of it. He says, why not give Palestine back to them again? According to God's distribution of nations, it is their home, an inalienable possession from which they were expelled by force. Under their cultivation, it was a remarkably fruitful land, sustaining millions of Israelites who industrially tilled its hillsides and valleys. They were agriculturalists and producers, as well as a nation of great commercial importance, the center of civilization and religion. Why shall not the powers which under the Treaty of Berlin in 1878 gave Bulgaria to the Bulgarians and Serbia to the Serbians now give Palestine back to the Jews? These provinces, as well as Romania, Montenegro, and Greece, were wrested from the Turks and given to their natural owners. Does not Palestine as rightfully belong to the Jews? It is said that rains are increasing and there are evidences that the land is recovering its ancient fertility. If they could have autonomy in government, the Jews of the world would rally to transport and establish their suffering brethren in their time-honored habitation. For over 17 centuries, they have patiently waited for such an opportunity. They have not become agriculturalists elsewhere because they believed they were mere sojourners in various nations and were yet to return to Palestine and till their own land. Whatever vested rights by possession may have accrued to Turkey can be easily compensated, possibly by the Jews assuming an equitable portion of the national debt. We believe this is an appropriate time for all nations, and especially the Christian nations of Europe, to show kindness to Israel. 1 million of exiles, by their terrible suffering, are piteously appealing to our sympathy, justice, and humanity. Let us now restore to them the land of which they were so cruelly despoiled by our Roman ancestors. Well, Blackstone's efforts actually were proven instrumental in that 31 years later, the United States government officially supported the creation of a Jewish state. And the European Zionist views, they actually align with the Khazarian, Ashkenazi, Edomite ideologies. And that gave root to the budding political agenda that quickly overpowered the spiritual seeds of Zionism. In other words, as Zionism gained momentum, its political agenda strengthened and it overpowered the religious undertones. Now, another author, Shlomo Sand, in his book called The Invention of the Jewish People, he articulates the underbelly of Zionism. He says Zionism, from its inception, was an ethnocentric nationalist movement that firmly enclosed the historical people of its own invention and barred any voluntary civil entry into the nation its platform began to design. At the same time, any withdrawal from the people was depicted as an unforgivable offense, and assimilation as a catastrophe, an existential danger to be averted at all cost. No wonder then to bind together that frangible secular Jewish identity, it was not enough to write a history of the Jews, so culturally disparate, so chronologically fragmentary. Zionism had to resort to another scientific discipline, that of biology, which was conscripted to reinforce the foundation of the ancient Jewish nation. So as political Zionism strengthened, the agenda became convoluted, with many layers to it. And I liken it to secret societies like Freemasonry. So on the surface, Zionism is a nationalistic movement characterized by the slogan, "A land without a people for a people without a land." But beneath this layer of public awareness lies this insidious agenda for global domination by Zionist elites. And so what we'll do in the next episode is we're going to dig deeper into who are these Zionist elites, particularly looking at the influence that the Rothschilds had in the creation of the nation state of Israel. So stay tuned for the next episode.